Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Whole thing, dude.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real.
Non-human, exotic origin, vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
Carl, always a pleasure speaking to you. How's things been?
It's been good, Vinny. Thanks for having me back, man.
Always, man. But it's been like over 6 months. It was certainly not 2025 that you've been on the show, and so much has happened. So I'd just like to kind of cover quite a few things with you and just have a nice free-flowing conversation. But I think the best place to start off would be in January. We had this kind of reveal of Skywatcher and that whole thing. And, you know, it was pretty exciting. And they've released some interesting information and a few videos on YouTube. But the thing that really stuck out for me mostly and is ongoing is psionics. This was kind of the first time I think I'd ever heard that term, but you know, upon looking into it and hearing about it, it does relate to a lot of things that have been talked about in the UFO community for years and years and years. So first of all, I'd like to get your take on Skywatcher, and then we can kind of go from there.
Skywatcher is really validating for me, honestly. A lot of the stuff that's been coming out, I didn't know initially when Jacob Barber appeared like on News Nation and told the whole story. And initially you're kind of like, you see the egg UFO, and you're like, what? It's kind of thrown back because it's totally counterintuitive to what you're imagining and what you see in movies and everything. But underneath the surface of it, the story that he told was really amazing. And then I actually realized that I've worked with one of the members of Skywatcher, one of the actual psionic assets that does the telepathy and the summoning and all of that kind of stuff. And I've actually worked with him and did psionics with him like over 2 years ago, and didn't know at the time, obviously, that he was a member of the team. But now that's always like, in hindsight, I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of all the puzzle pieces fit together. Some of the coincidences that were going on and like people that showed up at certain times and what happened all makes sense now. But yeah, so with Jacob Barber and all of that coming out, for me, that was really validating on many levels, for the fact that it lined up with Michael Herrera's story. I think that's his name, right? He's the one that talked about how, you know, he was the unit that went out and they saw that like similar 8-gun style craft that was loaded. And that was almost like a perfectly compatible story that locked in with Jacob Barber's account. And their stories also kind of overlapped in a really unique way where, you know, Barber talked about being in the back of the room when Michael Herrera was telling his story at a particular location and how a lot of this fit together for him personally. And he realized that, hang on, I might be on the wrong side of things here, you know? And I think for some of us, that's happened a couple of times where you sit and you kind of question who's around you, and if you're being used as a useful idiot or something like that. And you have to always kind of keep your wits about you and decide what your own intentions are in all of this as you go. But when Jacob Barber came forward, I saw these things that sort of added to the backstory. Like, a lot of people didn't really pick up on the fact that Gary Nolan was in the videos a lot. So when they're doing these cut scenes to showing Jacob Barber's team, Skywatcher, and those guys out in the field doing actual field work and summoning, Gary Nolan's right there. And again, I'm like, okay, well, Gary Nolan's like close friends with my current colleague, Dr. Jim Segala, on the Moopos project, who you just recently did an interview with him too. And so I'm like, man, this is like all connected really close to everything I've been doing for the last 4 years. I didn't even know it. And so what occurred to me was that I actually called my friend Chris Bartel who was security at Skinwalker Ranch for 8 years. And I was like, listen, these guys from Skywatcher, they're they either watched my YouTube channel over the last 4 years and saw what we were doing at Mount Wilson, because we were doing, we were hooking the EEG up to my head in the ancient indigenous cave, and we were doing summoning and stuff, and like doing telepathy experiments and measuring my brain waves and doing sound, ultra low frequency experiments like the dog whistle. We were doing all of that at Mount Wilson experimentally a couple of years ago, just as an independent team, just coming up with it on our own, like looking at Bigelow's old work and trying to figure out our own way of doing what they were doing. And it turns out now that the Skywatcher team comes out, and at the same time as we were doing our experiments in Nevada, they could have been on just one mountain range parallel to us or nearby doing the exact same stuff and actually catching objects and collecting them for Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or something, who knows. But to me, all of that really clicked together, and I was like, damn, there's something really going on. And not they're either copying what we did, and so they looked at all that and they're like, that's the story we're gonna go with, for because it's believable and Carl's already done the hard part. But I mean, but that's my ego wanting to feel important, if I'm going to talk like that. And if I put my ego aside, um, then it's still the only alternative now, is that the truth is that these guys who were, special forces, Green Beret, Delta Force, nuclear commanders and stuff were all, and guys in the Air Force and stuff that I've worked with before, were actually doing it as secret contracted groups, and we're doing it for real at the same time that we were in the same state, probably. And I know that they're doing it in different places, and um, I'm not allowed to talk about it too much, but I have been invited to go um, work potentially with Skywatcher, but that's can't be confirmed. I can't say too much. It's all kind of, how it is, tentative still. But if I go, I'm the you know how I work. It's like if they're gonna invite me, they know what that comes with. Like, I have to be allowed to film, I'm allowed to upload, and I don't fake anything. So that comes with it. If they're gonna ask me to go, that's what they get.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned there, these guys' backgrounds very military heavy, high profile roles. They wouldn't be doing this. Surely they wouldn't be doing this if there was something to it. They're not just going out into the desert to, after retiring from whatever the positions they were in, just to have a laugh and a joke around. That there's got to be something serious to this, because they have had some pushback from people online about still no evidence and all of this kind of thing. So what do you think about that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the pushback I think is good, and I feel like the Skywatcher team sort of have thrown it out there, welcoming it. And I've even said that, I think when they came out with their initial videos, my first response when I went out and started making my videos replying about it, is that it really is almost kind of like an open challenge in a way. Now it's like, okay, who's going to get there first? Because they're flat out releasing and saying the different types to look for, what to look for, how they react. And then they're even giving you like almost the formula of how there's a combination between um, telepathy and people who might be related to Native American DNA, for example, in certain ways, or indigenous culture DNA. It could be, global indigenous or Aboriginal people, just people who are connected to the land more than a lot of mental chatter. And so there's all of a sudden this side of like this whole underworld of the remote viewing programs that was going on in the government, and how all that ties in. It goes clear back to the Roswell crash. I mean, when you think about it, when you really look at those stories, everybody looks at like it's a flying saucer from outer space that came down and crashed or whatever because it malfunctioned. But all of those stories are overlapped with like the nurse having telepathic communication with the aliens, and then the military scrambling to figure out who can communicate with them. How do you talk to them? How are we going to deal with this? And why is this happening? And what does this mean about us and reality? I mean, all of this is like a can of worms spilling open right in everybody's lap all of a sudden. If it's real, if it's actually aliens or non-human interaction, then all of that just like fell in the desert one day. And it didn't just happen by chance. I think it was a side effect of some nuclear testing or new crossbeam radar technology that created an effect that was unexpected. But the whole thing, when you look at it and it goes back, the part that's surprising to me is how much it's just directly involves the human consciousness element, and then it forces that subject out. So the Skywatcher team is giving us all that too. So they're like, learn remote viewing, learn telepathy. They're even calling it summoning, which is like uh, for people who are sensitive religiously, that's like ruffling their feathers, and they got to deal with that. And then they're also talking about the combination of using technology, calling it the dog whistle. Like there's certain particular frequencies that attract the phenomena to appear or somehow reveal it or affect the people watching in proximity of this device to open up awareness, but then it actually manifests where they can capture it on camera. So, I mean, that's the whole thing, but it is challenging because the idea of like catching the proof of it and catching it on camera, it's it seems like a lot of times it's frustrating and disappointing because it shows up shaped like an egg, or it shows up shaped like a weird jellyfish, or that looks like a just a plasma blob in the sky or something. And this just isn't what we're anticipating or isn't what we're expecting. And so we're having to kind of look around this in different ways. And part of how I deal with it is I spend so much time looking at the ancient cultures and all of the history and the stories around that you can see the overlay when you really look at it. Like very rarely in UFO encounters and abduction stories is it shaped like a disc. A lot of the times it's just like a giant ball of fire, a plasma sphere, and then these beings emerge. There's even dead relatives there, and there's missing time, and then stuff follows them home almost like a poltergeist. And the stories are way more overlap than just like a saucer landing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
It's pretty cool. I think the fact that they lay it all out there and they give everybody kind of the formula, it gives just people like me the opportunity to go out on a weekend and explore it on my own. If I'm not scared of it, then I can actually go out and do this instead of it just being some secret specialized military group. Now they're like giving us the tool bag.
Yeah, I mean, they have said that they're keeping the dog whistle side of things, quiet to themselves, proprietary technology for the moment. But, having done certain things like that yourself in the past, do you have a good idea of what frequencies they may be using and like, more so than what they've said?
All I can say is that I know that when I've had a lot of success with it, it was in the ultra low frequency range. So, and that's 100% the truth. So we tried a bunch of different things when we were working with the History Channel, and we had like a whole bunch of expensive advanced equipment that we were using with ground penetrating sound equipment and everything. We were getting like no results at all, like no feedback, no interaction, not filming anything in the sky, nothing. And as soon as it like occurred to me that the one of the guys that was in the photographs on Bob Bigelow's team, there was Bigelow's and was there, Hal Puthoff was there, Jacques Vallée, Eric Davis. One of the guys in there was a guy named Tim Ryan or Tim Wren, and he had all these patents that he had gotten approved and had all this private funding, military funding, and everything for. And a lot of them were like ultra low range, like ground penetrating communication system technologies. And a lot of it was for like, uh, it's different when you're using a walkie talkie to communicate or a cell phone and you're passing that those radio waves through the air. As soon as you have to send those signals to like a submarine underwater, then it's a totally different game because the radio waves completely dissipate in the waves of the water and it insulates itself and dies. You can't transmit it. So you have to completely send the waves through the electromagnetic field of the earth itself. And that's a totally different range. You're actually going into the negative, almost the noise cancellation range in order to send and receive those signals. So when it occurred to me that like Tim Ryan was there in those photographs back on Bigelow's team and Jacques Vallée's there, and Jacques Vallée was part of, Project Blue Book with J. Allen Hynek, and that whole movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was all based on them using sound frequencies and tones and light tones to communicate with these entities. And so all of that fit together. And then when that occurred to us, that's when we threw the idea out there. And this is when it got weird. Was as soon as we shifted our focus into that ultra low noise cancellation range, then everything went wild. Like we had like preemptive reactions to where when he would reach his hand over to touch the iPad to try and adjust the signal, like we would say, oh, change it to like 16 gigahertz or something, like adjust it lower. And as he would go reach his hand over right after we got done saying that, whatever was buried underground or hiding underground would start sending that 16 gigahertz signal to us before his finger would even touch the iPad to adjust our frequency. So it would like it was reading our mind, and then it would send us this frequency before we would talk to it, and back and forth. And then we would send a signal, and when you could count like 1001, 1002, and you could count to like 7, and then it would like ring like a bell and answer us back, and it would reply to us like almost like communicating with a dolphin or something. And so the ultra low range is what I could say we had a lot of success. And then simultaneously, Skywatcher talked about how there's and Matthew Brown, the Pentagon whistleblower, mentioned this too, how there will be larger craft and then smaller spheres or orbs and things that will come out of them. And we may have caught one of those even on like the Skywatcher equipment, night vision skywatching equipment that we had. So while this thing was resonating underground and communicating with us, we caught weird stuff zipping around in the clouds above us. So you couldn't see it. It was all at night, but the night vision cameras caught it. And what was weird is that that ultra low frequency, once we got into that and this thing started communicating, I mean, Andrew Bustamante, the CIA guy, like everybody on the crew was like freaking out. Like this was wild. Like the whole film crew kind of paused for almost 20 minutes. Like, what the hell's going on here? And then after that, for the whole rest of the film shoot, we were there for another 3 or 4 days. There was like the drone operator guy. He started waking up in the night and like having night terrors. And he was saying, I won't go with you. I won't go with you. And he like wake up having nightmares. And the producer of the whole show, um, we were having all kinds of weird paranormal effects like on the crew where people were swearing that they saw their deceased relatives just like standing in the trees out by the meadow and like totally haunted, like weird things. But then you hear Matthew Brown come out and talk about how these craft might have sort of defense mechanisms or something that affect our own consciousness to make us, tap into our own fears or our own things like that that would haunt us, kind of to deter us or uh, to affect us in different ways. So I don't know. All of that's a part of it that you have to wonder what's going on. But yeah, to that's a long answer to kind of like what frequency should we be looking.
I know, no, 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 and that's the beautiful thing. It does all seem to have these like interlinking connections between so many other aspects of the UFO subject that have been talked about before, but maybe have almost been separate at the time. But now we're able to make those connections. I think it's fascinating. It makes me think, if there's some object or device underneath Mount Wilson Ranch. Could that be globally, where there's UFO hotspots and things like that?
Yeah, like I kind of think like if if it's true that like after Roswell, the story goes that Philip Corso kind of had to decide what are we going to do with this craft, because if we just give it to one agency or one department, then they have a complete monopoly and could literally crack the code of how this works and then dominate the world. And that's almost dangerous to do even internally within your own country. Like if you just gave it to Lockheed and then they figure out how to do it and it's like a time travel craft or something, then Lockheed doesn't have to worry about what the government says anymore. They can take over. They can change history. They could go back and rewrite time and how things occurred or whatever. And so the idea is to like split the technology up in different ways. And if these things did communicate through the earth or they communicate through these alternate waveforms and dimensions, that probably created a whole different offspring of that kind of research and back engineering too. And so now we have all these like phased array systems and the HARP systems that get blamed for weather control, and whistleblowers coming out talking about there being systems buried in Antarctica that can like Tesla technology that's been kept secret from humanity and stuff. And so it makes you wonder if like along at the same time as they realized that there was these craft and UFOs and that they weren't just like coming from outer space, but they're catching them coming out of actual mountains and like out of the ocean. Our radar equipment that may have caused the Roswell crash was also like a breakthrough. Like, okay, now they start experimenting with this and it keeps happening again and again. Um, Another incident is that David Grush and Matthew Brown talked about how in Italy, that Mussolini and the Vatican were actually the first ones back in like 1935 or something like that. And then 33, yeah, where there was a UFO that went down there, and then the Pope actually leaked that information to the CIA. And then, wild enough that my own father was in the army in Germany in the early 1940s and had cosmic clearance, which is a higher than top secret level clearance, a NATO level clearance. And he was stationed in Germany. But when he passed away, in his military records, there was a picture of him in front of a big chapel in Milan, in Italy, in the 1940s. And I, I used like AI to try and crack it, and it said that he might have been there for some of that, like to go on some of those operations. So even my own dad, like it's so crazy. But yeah, if there's like a UFO and they're coming in and out of particular places underground and the military figured that out, they probably realized really quick that these things are all over the place. And then they probably got into a race of figuring out where they are and then going there and then installing sort of equipment or radar equipment over top or in those locations to monitor them. Because what do you do? It's like if there's a 500-foot pyramid shaped craft buried under a mountain in Nevada and it's 300 feet deep, and you don't know what it is or what it's doing, and it literally disappears and reappears like interdimensionally, like you can't just dig it up, and you can't just build a whole military base over top of it, because what if it comes out of the ground and does something? Like, what do you do if they're everywhere? So you'd have to kind of put monitoring systems, uh, ground sensors and things, and leave them there to monitor these things and watch them, and just kind of learn and see what you could do as you kind of caught up with your own technology so you could do something about it. And I honestly, personally believe that's why these things are all over the place. They've been here for a long time. I think there's the ancient cultures, Aboriginal people and Indigenous people. That's probably why they built certain artifacts and pyramids and mounds and Stonehenge and burials like in certain locations for those reasons. And all of that is connected for me. And I think that the government also, that's why there's this weird overlap. Like with Skinwalker Ranch, people are like, is that like a military base buried underground? Is this a uh, some directed energy weapon system that's actually like a grid that's going to do Project Bluebeam where they're just going to fake holograms? And the truth is, it could be both. It could be that stuff kind of built over top of the non-human intelligence. Because if there is a non-human intelligence craft or a base underground, you're damn well going to put a piece of a device like that over top of it or nearby to monitor that. So you're going to have both going on. And so I think it gets really messy when you think about it.
Oh yeah, I mean this subject is just messy, isn't it? So there's no surprises there. But you know, you mentioned a few times there, it doesn't look to be almost as simple as beings coming from outer space. It's something more dimensional, and whether it's a professional team, Skywatcher, or the Bigelow team in the past, or just an individual stepping outside to do CE5, do you see danger in some of what we may be trying to partake in just by summoning or calling in these unknowns?
I think the only dangers are I do have to say this. So as part of MUPOS, part of the modular study, uh, and with Gary Nolan involved, and right there over their shoulder too is Kit Green, who was like the lead doctor for the CIA and everything. And they're at the core of this whole idea that there is interference syndrome. And that comes from the Rendlesham Forest incident, where the craft came down and some of those guys actually walked up and touched the thing. And then they had physical effects, almost like they were in Chernobyl or something. You know, the actual physical damage to their thyroid and their gums in their mouth, and all, and then even lesions in their brain that they call interference syndrome. Now it's like Havana syndrome. And so again, you don't know, is it really dangerous? Because that's a cover story to hide the side effects of directed energy systems. Like if it's a government s- um, non-lethal weapon that's like meant to, just like you can fly a drone, you know, you can remote control a drone by transmitting frequencies into a receiver. If they figured out how to transmit frequencies into your brain, into your occipital lobe, or into your DNA, then you're going to perceive reality, have hallucinations or visions, and think you're seeing things that you're not. And they might even be able to do that to a group of people. But if they're not, if it's man-made technology, then or and driven by artificial intelligence and stuff, it might not be perfect all the time, and so it could microwave people. So if I don't I would say there is potential risk that if there is government involvement or radar systems or equipment involved, then it definitely could be dangerous. But my personal experience when it comes to like the non-human intelligence phenomena has always been more spiritual. It's been more enlightening, and it's been more like getting in touch with higher understanding and with my like true purpose in life. And it's been much more personal, and so I feel like I'm not afraid of the actual phenomena itself. And but maybe that's just because the approach that I take when I go out into the do the field work is the combination that I take attracts that positive experience for me. But other people that go out there like with a we're going to capture these things attitude, or with an attitude like we're military and we've got guns, or these are shapeshifter aliens and we got to be careful. To me, the way that psionics work and this whole phenomena works is sort of like you're going to you're going to attract what you're bringing to the table. You're half of the formula here. Like one of the I'll say this, there's a lot of deeper levels to psionics and what how psionics actually work that I think people misunderstand. And when we say this word and when we talk about remote viewing, it's just like people have a hard time even wrapping their head around what that even means, you know? But like I'll just say it like this, like we perceive reality as though like we're an individual and we have a body and the world is like outside of us, and we're just in the world, and we're just like a creature in the universe walking around, and that everything is separate from us. So like when you go outside and you look up at the clouds are separate from you and they're up there in the sky. But it's also paradoxically true that everything that you perceive in reality is also happening in one place. It's appearing in the singularity of you witnessing it as the being the conscious awareness paying attention. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at a mountain or cars driving by or a UFO appears in the sky, all of that has to appear in the singular, in the one place of you as the consciousness that's there perceiving it. And so, what you bring to the table when you go out into the field, your intentions, your attitude, why you're there, what you're looking for, and all of that is directly connected, quantum entangled with the communication before you even get there. You have to realize if you're communicating with something outside of time and space, outside of space time, then it's already paying attention and knows like your thoughts from before you were born. We're talking almost like this gets mystical almost, like when you think about it. But from our perspective in linear time, it's hard to fathom that kind of interaction at that higher level. Um, we perceive it as like deja vu and coincidences and things, and a lot of this we just like take for granted. I think, you know, when we talk about like UFOs or encountering paranormal things, for me, I immediately visualize, and in my mind I conjure almost visions of what those things look like, and I can see them in my mind almost like a vision or like I'm watching a movie. And it's actually true that almost 60% of the population of the world statistically can't even do that yet or hasn't evolved to be able to do that. Meaning, like when they read a book, they're not seeing the book play out. Like if they read Lord of the Rings, they're reading it and they're hearing the story, but they're not really actually watching it like the movie in their mind. And so, and a lot of us who do that, who actually visualize three dimensionally and can rotate that image and explore it with our mind, that's actually special. And and most of us that can do that our whole lives didn't realize that that was special. Most of us were just told, sit down, be quiet, you have ADHD, take your pills and stuff like that. We didn't realize that that was actually this higher dimensional thing. But the government did know. And they developed these screening programs in the public schools, like the gifted and talented program and things, to where kids that had those aptitudes, they could filter and kind of guide into joining the Marines or joining the Air Force by the time they're graduating high school or whatever. And then pretty soon they're exactly like Michael Herrera, Jacob Barber, one of these guys, and they're working on a special team in a psionics program, you know, as all of that comes out. But I can't even remember what your initial question was, but yeah, the way that like psionic works and all that, I think is a little bit more personal and counterintuitive than I think what people are expecting.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. And this is exactly why I wanted the conversation to be like, to see, because we're making all those connections. And something that you've done on your channel is a video, and you visit a lot of ancient sites and look at a lot of petroglyphs. And one thing that seems to have come up is this jellyfish depiction, and that seems to connect to a lot of the conversation these days with, first we had the jellyfish video from Jeremy Corbell, and now we've got Jake Barber saying the jellyfish are one of these, regular shapes that they're witnessing as well in similar areas to where you visited. It's just crazy how it connects.
Yeah, the way that they look in the carvings almost fits like a puzzle. Like when you go, there's actually carvings of what look like a villager, and he's looks like he's literally pointing, and then there's the sun, and then in next to the sun looks like a jellyfish coming down from the sky, and then a big wavy jellyfish with a strange symbol next to it, and then looks like the villager, and then weird anthropomorphic figures that definitely could be interactions with non-human intelligence, you know. The whole thing with like jellyfish and the hornet, and they have all these different classifications and they all kind of overlap in a certain way. Or I don't know if we're quite sure if they're actually different or the same, or they just appear in different forms. Part of that, I wonder also if we're not actually seeing the entire thing. Like imagine if the level that we're getting on camera and with the that we're actually capturing and seeing might just be a small portion of a strange propulsion system on the back of a craft, and it's not even the whole thing. Or we might just be seeing what looks like the core of the weird non-human energy system that flows through the engine in the core, and the craft around it is still completely invisible. So we're just seeing this weird shape moving around that looks like a blob, um, that we're catching in our spectrum of being able to see it and get it on camera. But the totality of what could be there could be a lot bigger. Like you might just be seeing, like if a whole invisible jet flew by, you might just see the exhaust. You might not see the craft. You might just be seeing the wake, you know. And so we have to kind of think in terms of uh, also we might just be catching the shadows.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because it makes you think, so many different shapes and sizes and types of craft have been seen and reported over decades and decades, if not longer. Yet, yeah, it makes sense that we could be seeing very similar things or the same thing, but from different angles, or like you said, parts are still invisible. So that theory quite resonates quite highly with me. Yeah.
And you know, and we're looking for them to be like a craft, like something that's been built or something that's made. Uh, it's hard for us to fathom. Like Matthew Brown even described it, it looked like a floating brain, you know. And but again, if we talk about this higher level of phenomena and what we're learning, like in communication with non-human intelligence, in a lot of ways, is like the deeper that you look into space, it's the deeper you're also going to look into yourself and to understand yourself. And there's something about this phenomena that is like looking into the mirror. And what I mean by that is the mirror of your subconscious. Like, and this is why if you go into a location like up to Skinwalker Ranch and you go there with a lot of fear and you're expecting to have a haunted experiment experience or something like that, you might run into something that appears to you like a werewolf or something that is really scary, or something like a demon crawling out of the ground or whatever. And how would you know if you went to a place that was so special and so sacred, and that a part of your own subconscious could literally walk up to you? You might not even recognize yourself if it was your own, if it was your own self-doubt. Like that might totally appear like a ghoul to you. You know what I mean? But to the person next to you, it might appear like a tall white or an angel. You know what I mean? And the phenomena is interfacing with who you are and revealing to you and showing you particular aspects, you know, that you're supposed to see. That has been my experience. And so um that's why I say it's like very personal in that sense. So can it be dangerous? Yeah. I mean, depending on what you take there with you, but also we don't know if they're just like physical, actual craft, or if they're just like the most pure form of our human potential and manifestation and connecting directly with the universe. You know, what if these things are showing up and they look like a floating brain, literally because it's a group of people projecting their consciousness, and that consciousness is appearing in the shape of the actual physical anatomy in the sky of the brain and the spinal cord floating around up there trying to communicate back, like looking in some strange mirror. So I think we need to think of all these dynamic possibilities, instead of it just being aliens, you know?
It's refreshing to hear that, because I always say that we try so hard to humanize or fit them into a box so that we have some kind of way of understanding when and if we get disclosure about this. And I've always said, and I continue to say, that I think if and when we do get some kind of confirmation or some answers, that it'll be way beyond what we've kind of come up with already. It'll be so far beyond our perceptions, that these things are so strange that it doesn't make sense that they're just aliens coming in, craft that they've built out of special metals in space. You know, it's got to be a lot more than that, based on the history and the weight and depth of the subject. It's so bizarre. So that's good to hear.
I think it's really like the reason that disclosure is difficult is because it's going to challenge the ground under our own feet. It's going to challenge like understanding what physical reality actually is. Could upturn everything. We could go from realizing that we're living in a physical three-dimensional reality to actually elevating to being like this is a matrix, like, or this is a field, a waveform, to where there is no here and there. It's all just now, you know? There is no past and future. Like, now we're at a state where things like the past and the future just exist as a, a state of consciousness in the mind that we conjure, you know? Just all these different places that you think about what it could unravel to where, um, we might realize that things are more like a video game where as you turn the corner, the you actually fill in the gaps of what exists there as your perception turns the corner, where your consciousness is manifesting the reality as you go around because everything has to appear within the view of a witness or it's not really there. Like, so there's these fundamental things that kind of break down that I think are going to challenge people, where we're going to realize where these things are actually coming from and why they haven't just wiped us out, and why they always want to stop us from destroying ourselves. But you know, there's all these puzzling things about their behavior, that don't make sense to us that I think will make a lot more sense when we get to the bottom of it.
I really hope so. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned in the Skinwalker Ranch, and at the time of recording this interview, I think we're on the cusp of a new season of Skinwalker Ranch TV show on History Channel. You know, some might say, well, what else is left for them to investigate and experiment on? So, what have you got any hopes or any ideas about, or things that you think they should be doing to sort of continue this mysterious investigation?
I think that Brandon Fugal already knows. I think that I think that they have a really good idea already as far as, um, the approach that they need to take. And now the the game is across the zenith to where the problem is getting the information and the story out and what's going on, in a way that's digestible for people. And so it's like, okay, this might take like 5 more seasons for people to get what's going on, because when you take it from where it was in season 1 even up to season 5, they weren't even talking about things like, remote viewing and telepathy. But then when you get to season 4, they're doing drum circles and bringing in a rabbi, and they're doing all kinds of things and admitting stuff. And so you can see kind of the progression, and also the expansion, the creation of the spinoff show that I was a part of for the first 2 seasons. They also did the Beyond Skinwalker show. I mean, when the, it would be really easy for Brandon and the History Channel and everybody to be like territorial and be like, this is the only place, like Skinwalker Ranch is special. It's only happening here, and we have the door and the key, and we're going to unlock it. And they are kind of playing that, but really quickly, as soon as they could, it was like Mount Wilson Ranch is thrown on the table, Sedona, like a whole, um, Chris Bledsoe's presented out there, and the whole idea of consciousness and summoning is thrown out to the world right through the History Channel, and you see the whole conversation shift, but that takes like season after season. So I think it's kind of like a slow drip, But a lot of that is changing. You've got these big uh, documentaries that are coming out with Jay Stratton and Hal Puthoff, and like all of the big names are going to be stepping forward, and they're starting to step forward now. And something happened now that Trump's in office, where there's like a new stick swinging around in the back rooms. I think somebody else is shoving their way around in the Pentagon and getting things done to where this stuff is moving forward now.
That's cool. I'm glad you said that, because it does sometimes feel like it's, it grinds to a halt and then there's no progress. But I always think there is stuff happening, behind the scenes. Quite cliche term these days, but I do believe that. And, if you mentioned Brandon Fugal may know a bit more, then in the same vein with Matthew Brown talking about Immaculate Constellation and the government having all this stuff, do you think that the government, to some degree, and I say the government, I should, probably use a better term, do you think there are entities and individuals within these projects that probably know a lot more? Because sometimes we're led to almost believe that the government know nothing. They have the objects, they have retrieved these craft, but they don't know what they are. They don't know how to reverse engineer them. So where do you think the truth lies in that aspect?
It's kind of fractured like a kaleidoscope. It's really strange. Like you have these sort of keepers of the secret that have followed along, and a few of those are out in the light now. Like Hal Puthoff and a lot of these people. Nobody used to even know who they were, and now they're going on Joe Rogan. That's pretty wild to me. But yeah, these guys used to be all in these private programs, or maybe were part of MJ12 or different things, and now it's changed where they're coming out and talking. I think that there is a lot more that's known behind the scenes, but it's with certain individuals and people. And each of those people, maybe back when they were really involved in it, were only seeing part of the piece of the pie. So they only got to see a certain part of the technology or an experience with it, or maybe other ones were dealing with the biology, and another individual was dealing with the communication and the telepathy or remote viewing side of it. But we live in a world now to where, like, in the core of it and behind the scenes, while they were coming up with remote viewing, Jacques Vallée was actually at the same time as he was involved in developing remote viewing, they were taking the conversations with remote viewer Ingo Swann and Pat Price, and even Navajo code talker Carl Gorman. I work with his granddaughter now, Colleen Gorman, out of the Navajo tribe in New Mexico. And the Navajo code talker and that whole system of language and thinking and codexing communication actually created ARPANET, the initial internet that that was used by the government before the public had any access. So think of how this was clear back before anybody had internet. Jacques Vallée and these guys in the remote viewing teams were developing the internet that we all use. Like, that's crazy. Like, Jacques Vallée, the UFO guy, helped invent the internet, and he used remote viewers and Navajo code talkers to do it. And like all of that, we don't know, and it's like coming out now. But I think that it's a slow drip to where, like, now we do have the internet, and so everybody can cross check and we can communicate, and all these people that were in compartmentalized programs can kind of look across and see each other and reach out. And now these whistleblowers are coming out, and when the new laws are passed or new people get moved into Congress and stuff, it becomes a mixed bag, because government officials will get elected and they'll have different terms of office, and so people will come and go and they'll only learn so much. But there's people that, like, there might be a scientist that works at Lockheed Martin who's been there for 50 years or something, and he knows everything, but he's never going to come out of the cave. You know what I mean? He's in there for life pretty much. And so I think it's just different groups of people in kind of a mixed bag, but more and more are starting to come out. And a lot of these guys are getting older. Like Hal Puthoff, he's like what, 87 or 88 now. And so what do they got to lose? It's time to go on Joe Rogan and tell your stories.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the age of disclosure, and then things that come from that in the future as well. I think that's an avenue that hopefully will continue. But the last thing I'd like to talk to you about is something we have spoken about when you've joined me previously. Is you actually went out to the Hessdalen Valley in Norway, and this is related to the program in the 1980s with Erling Strand and the orbs and plasma balls that were spotted and seen and filmed in the valley back then, and still to this day. And there is a new documentary out. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so some of my friends and people that I met there at Project Hestalon, they were also working on documentaries and stuff. And I have this habit, I turn my projects around so quick. Like as soon as I'm home, I'm like posting my videos. A lot of other people, they'll sit and work on a project and put it together. They're more professional maybe than me, and they'll build a whole documentary. And so there's, several friends and groups that were there at Project Hestalon that filmed that whole experience and now are releasing their documentaries, and some of that is coming out. And now Project Hestalon is becoming a whole thing. And some of that is like when I went, I did like the whole summoning, and we did as part of Project Hestalon, we did a CE5, like a whole group thing, and filmed like different things appearing and even maybe could have come down. And that actually caused like a bunch of friction initially between the experiencers and the Hestalon scientists and some of the really high level like university scholars and stuff that were there and involved. That's like, who's this guy coming over from United States, and he films this like his first day there basically. I'm like, but I mean, like, but again, it's like it's not because I'm special, it's just because I've gone a different route to explore the consciousness side, and to work with Native American people really intimately and stuff on it. And like, so I've taken a different route, but also really appreciate the scientific side and want to catch that evidence because I understand it's important for the world, that way. But it caused a big like friction where there was like emails back and forth with it. People were like upset, like that I was going to embarrass them and things. But ultimately, w- uh, you know, we came to terms, and we ended up realizing like this is time where now experiencers and the scientists and the government we have to all like drop our prejudices now and just look and just attach ourselves to the answers and attach ourselves to the evidence, and luckily like working with Dr. Sagala, now we've got MUPOS devices there as part of Project Tessalin, like to monitor experiencers in their homes, and we have the collaboration now. And Dr. Sagala is a huge proponent of that. The experiencer and their story is a big part of the puzzle. And like, we can't just discount it. Like, just because somebody said that they saw something or they heard a voice in their head or they feel something, we have the technology now to catch the proof that that actually happened and that it wasn't imaginary. So to tell people that they're hallucinating, or that they they're just seeing satellites in the sky and imagining that they're hearing things in their head when they're seeing that, like all that stuff, uh, scientists and actually high level people are starting to drop their barriers about all that and be more open minded. But that's because the evidence is actually proving that to be the case, that they have to. They scientifically are having to drop their hesitations and prejudices about that. And also the experiencers, we have to stop running around with UFO fever too, and actually use satellite trackers, use EMF detectors, and you have to debunk yourself or you're just not going to be credible too. So you have to approach the scientific level too and actually try to be data driven when you're working as well. So like we have to meet in the middle.
No, I think that's a really important message, man. And I will put some links in the description. I'll put the latest Hest Island documentary link in there. I'll put your channel in there as well. But Carl, I want to thank you so much, man. It's always great getting your perspective and angle on things. It always gives me so much to take away and some real food for thought. So thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Vinny. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And to everyone watching, as always, really appreciate it. Please go and check out Carl's channel if you don't already. I'm sure you do, but that'd be much appreciated. And until the next time, take care and goodbye.